It wasn't the sound of the sea that haunted me at night, but the silence that followed it. The silence after the crash of the waves, the moment when the world held its breath. It was then that I first knew real fear. The sea was always a reminder of how small we are, how helpless we are in the face of its vastness, but it was the emptiness that comes after a storm that brought me to my knees. It wasn't just the silence of the ocean, it was the silence in my heart, the realization that I was utterly alone. The silence seemed to last forever. A vast emptiness swallowed me whole, leaving me adrift in a world I no longer recognized. That silence spoke of an end, of broken dreams, of a future that now seemed uncertain and bleak. I was alone when David found me, drenched from the rain, with empty promises left by a husband who had decided I wasn't worth throwing myself for. I was 45 and a stranger in my own skin, an invalid, trapped in a chair, unable to rise on my own from the ruins my life had become. I had once thought I would spend my final years beside the one who had sworn never to leave me, but here I was, staring at the cold, unforgiving walls of a house that now seemed too big and empty. The echoes of the past seemed to mock me, and I could no longer recognize the person I had once been. My body had betrayed me, and my spirit was broken, as if all the strength had been drained from me. It was as if I had become a ghost haunting my own life, lost and forgotten. David was my nephew, at least that's what I called him, though blood didn't connect us. He came to me a lost boy, only 20 years old at the time, adrift at sea, both literally and metaphorically. His boat capsized and I was on shore to pull him out, half drowned, with eyes that seemed to have already seen the other side of death. I saved his life that day, but there was no way I expected that one day he would save mine. He was just a boy then, shivering and scared, and I remember wrapping a blanket around his shoulders and feeling an inexplicable connection between us. I thought it was a fleeting moment, an encounter with destiny, but it turned out to be the beginning of something much bigger. A bond formed in that moment, something unspoken but strong, something that would bind us together for years to come. The day David returned, I realized that love doesn't always mean romance. Sometimes it means sacrifice. He walked into a house I could no longer maintain. His eyes were full of a determination that made me feel needed again. He picked up the pieces of my shattered existence without saying a word, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And me? I wanted to protest, to tell him that he deserved better more than being saddled with an aunt who could no longer stand on her feet. But words failed me, and my eyes filled with tears that held gratitude and shame at the same time. How could I ask him to stay if I had nothing to offer in return? But David hadn't asked for anything, not my approval, not my gratitude. He simply stayed. He stayed, and by staying, he brought a light into my life that I thought had been extinguished forever. That first night he made me tea. His hands were firm as he poured, and I shivered, not because I was cold, but because the warmth of his presence was too much for me. He told me stories of his adventures at sea, the places he'd seen, the people he'd met. He filled the silence with laughter and hope, and little by little I felt myself coming back to life. It was as if he breathed color into my world, painting the dull grays with bright, vibrant hues. I listened to his stories, closing my eyes and imagining the salty breezes, the endless horizon, the freedom he described. In those moments, I wasn't trapped in my chair. I was there with him, floating on the waves, alive again. His words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the abyss, reminding me that there was still beauty in the world, that there was still something worth holding on to. "Auntie," he said to me one night, his voice soft as he knelt beside my chair, "you saved me once. Now it's my turn. I'm not going anywhere." I looked into his eyes and saw not pity, but love, pure, unconditional love. And in that moment, I realized that maybe I wasn't abandoned at all. The fear that had possessed me for so long began to subside. David wasn't just offering me his help. He was offering me his heart, his unwavering belief that I was still worth something, still deserving of love. He saw me, not just the broken shell of a woman I had turned into, but the person I still was inside, the person I had forgotten how to be. He reminded me that I was more than my limitations, more than the pain that had come to define me. David cared for me in a way I could never ask anyone else to. He carried me when I couldn't walk, held my hand when the nights were too long, and made me believe that I still mattered, that I was still here for a reason. His touches were gentle, his words were always kind, and I began to realize that my life wasn't over, it was just different. There was a beauty in the quiet moments we shared. He slicked my hair back, smiled at me when I felt too weak to smile back. He brought life back into my empty house, filling it with warmth and laughter, reminding me that even broken things can be beautiful. He showed me that even in my fragility, there is still strength, that even in my vulnerability, there is still value. He made me feel human again. There were nights when the pain in my body overwhelmed me and I sank into despair. Darkness would close in, and I could feel myself sinking in, wondering why I was still here, what my purpose was. But David was there, sitting by my bedside, his voice murmuring softly in the darkness. He never talked about what he had sacrificed to be here, never once made me feel like a burden. Instead, he talked about the future, about the dreams we could still share, about the sunsets we would watch from the porch when I felt well enough to go outside. He promised me that there were many more good days ahead, that this wasn't the end of my story, just a new chapter. His words were like balm on my scarred soul, soothing aches that were deeper than physical pain. He gave me hope that I thought was lost forever. "You are my family, Auntie," he would say, placing his hand on mine. And as I looked at him, this young man who had every reason to leave but chose to stay, I realized that I had gained something more precious than anything I had lost, a love bound not by blood but by heart. He reminded me that family is not only who we were born to be, but who chose to stay, who chose to love us when we were the most unloved. David was my family not by birth, but by choice, and that's what mattered. He chose me every day, and in doing so, he gave me back the ability to choose for myself, to fight for my life again. David saved me not from the sea, but from myself, and for that I will be forever grateful to him. He showed me that even in the midst of loss, it is possible to gain. He taught me that even when we are at our lowest point, there is still hope. I may never walk again, I may never be the person I used to be, but I'm still here. And as long as David is by my side, I know I am not alone. Together we stand against the waves, the storms, and the silence that follows, knowing we have someone to hold on to. And in that, I have found strength again. I found a reason to keep going, to keep living, to keep hoping. The journey may not be easy, but with David by my side, I know the journey is worth the effort, and that may be the greatest gift of all.